Hello everyone and welcome to round 9 of the FIDE Chess Olympiad 2022. It is Praggnanandhaa versus Vasif Durarbayli. India 2 faces Azerbaijan, and it is one of the two big clashes that are happening in round 9. So India 2 faces Azerbaijan, and of course the youngsters of Team Uzbekistan face Armenia. So we're going to discuss about what happened in that match, but first to get some things out of the way. I know you guys are wondering about Gukesh. How did he play as he faced Shahriar Mamedyarov? He had the white pieces. It was a very quick draw, and there was not really much happening there. Gukesh, I felt, was in absolute control for the entire game. In the end, he could not pursue that 9 out of 9, but I mean, it would be silly to try and push something against Mamedyarov on board 1. So his incredible run comes to an end, but even with a draw against Mamedyarov, he still gains rating points. So we're going to discuss the ratings in the second video. So that's what happened on board 1. On board 2, we also had a draw between Rauf Mamedov and Nihal Sarin. And on board 4, India 2 suffered a loss. Raunak Sadvani lost his game to Abbasov, and now it is up to Praggnanandhaa to level the score. Otherwise, India will lose to Azerbaijan. So let's see what happened in this game. Pragg has the white pieces and he opens with d4. We have knight to f6, c4, e6, knight to f3 and b6. Here Durarbayli goes for the Queen's Indian defense, and we've discussed this quite a lot ever since AlphaZero said that Queen's Indian defense is completely unplayable. Humans haven't really played it all that much, but we still see it from time to time with some new ideas. So let's see how Pragg goes about this. We have g3. This is all top standard theory, so nothing new here. Bishop to a6. We have b3 defending the c4 pawn, and the bishop to b4 check. We have bishop to d2, captures on d2, queen captures, and now we have pawn to c6. Bishop to g2, very nicely developed, as the rook on a8 might be hanging in some lines, and here just d5. We have castles, and now knight b to d7, rook to c1, and now here we have castles by Durarbayli, and again, this has all been played before, a4 by Pragg, and now comes bishop to b7. Bishop to b7 is the first real rare move of the game. Usually people just go queen to a7 here or rook to c8, but bishop to b7 is incredibly rare, and now Pragg goes knight to c3. And it is now, as of move 12, that we have a completely new game. There is a game where a5 was attempted. Valentina Gunina played it against Anastasia Bondaruk in the Russian Championship of 2017 for women in St. Petersburg. But here, of course, we have knight to c3, and now it's a completely new game. So rook to b8, now it's new territory. Durarbayli gets the rook over to the b file. Like we said, the bishop controlling this diagonal, you do not want your bishop there, and if a5 is played or something like that, you might have problems. Also, if the bishop moves, b5 is an option, so c5 is an option. The rook is better placed on b8. So here we have knight to e1, and now pawn to c5, opening up the position. C captures on d5, c captures on d4, and now queen captures on d4, and now knight to c5. Of course, now you cannot go for any captures, as the queen on d4 would hang. So rook b to e1, rook a to b1. And now e captures on d5. Durarbayli just wins back his pawn. So knight to f3, and now knight to e6, chasing away Pragg's queen. We have queen back to d1, and now knight to e4, offering a queen trade. And while Pragg could go for this, it doesn't give him all that much. For example, you trade, knight captures, pawn captures, queen captures on d8, rook b captures, and now you can go knight to e5. You can maybe try and get this rook to c7 if the knight ever moves, but with the knight on e6, it's not a really scary position for black. So Pragg keeps all of the material on the board. He goes knight to b5. Now controls the c7 square with the knight as well. So now queen to f6, and now rook to c2. And here it seems like maybe you can kick away the knight, play a6, kick away the knight, and get the knight to c3 to win some material. The problem is, if you play a6, the knight comes to d4, the queen no longer guards the c3 square. So that's why it is not a viable option. So here just a5 by Durarbayli, and now pawn to e3. Also, the rook on c2 is doing a fine job guarding the f2 pawn, so if the knight on f3 ever moves, you don't have to worry about queen captures on f2. So rook b to c8, and now rook b to c1, Pragg doubles up on the c file, knight 6 to c5, closing the c file, and now knight f to d4. And you can see that Pragg's pieces are now excellently placed, the rook's controlling the c file, the bishop on g2, but Durarbayli's pieces also doing incredible work. The knight here very, very strong, the queen here very active, and well, the bishop for the moment hitting his own pawn, but that's you know, usually the fate of the light square bishop when you're playing the black piece. It takes a while for it to come alive. So g6, and now queen to f3. Pragg says, alright, the only way to continue is to trade queens, and it seems that Durarbayli agrees with Pragg as he declines the trade. He goes back, queen to e7, bishop to f1 now, and knight to g5, kicking away the queen, queen to d1, and now queen back to f6. We have queen back to g4, and now knight g to e4. We have queen to f4, again offering a queen trade, and again Durarbayli declines this. He prefers his chances with queens on the board, and here Pragg says, alright, now it's my time to attack, and plays pawn to h4. Now h5 is coming, maybe even h6, as black is without dark square bishop, so this would this would make it very, very hard for you to play with black. So bishop to a6, and now comes pawn to h5. With bishop captures on b5, here Durarbayli decided that the bishop here was not all that impressive, and that it's better to just trade it away for one of the very strong knights. A captures on b5, and now rook c to e8. We have rook to d1, still waiting with any pawn pushes here. You could push the pawn all the way to h6, but then black would probably consolidate with something like f6 or f5, king to h8, and his position would be okay. So you have to wait with moves like this. So rook to d1, and now queen to d7, bishop to g2, and now pawn to f5. Very, very nicely done. Queen to f3, and now defending that h5 pawn, but now just pawn to g5. And here things start to get really out of control. Here, point is, if you try something like h6, maybe you want to bring the queen over to h5, we could even see a draw by repetition. For example, rook f6 goes after the pawn, queen defends the pawn, rook to g6, now you can bring the queen back to f3, and now we might see a repetition, rook f6, queen h5, and so on, because the f5 pawn is hanging. And if you move this rook over to f8 to defend it, then you no longer control the e5 square. Maybe the knight comes to c6, then to e5, and then could be anything. So instead we have rook to b2. Pragg prepares b4. If he can do this, he's going to open up the a file, and now king to h8. The king will be much safer on this diagonal. b4 by Pragg, and now a captures on b4. Rook captures, and now knight to c3, attacking the rook on d1, rook to d2, and now knight 3 to e4. Here, maybe there was a way to make an improvement here. The knight will come to the knight will come to e4 at some point, but rook to a8 might be a nice inclusion before that. But okay, knight 3 to e4 attacks the rook, rook to d1, and now knight to c3. Here, Durarbayli repeats once. Rook to d2, knight 5 to e4 now, bringing the other knight closer, and now rook to c2. Putting pressure on the knight, and now it's a little bit different. Now, of course, you can play rook to a8, which happens in the game, but now rook b3, and now you're just threatening to give up a rook for the two knights. So rook to a1 with check, not king to h2. If you go king to h2, then it's game over. Then just g4, and you don't have a way of defending your h5 pawn. Queen has to move. Now comes queen to e8. Incredible move. Not even queen to f7. Then you can play queen to h6. After queen to e8, now it's a game over, because now if you try this queen to h6 move, there's rook f6, and now the queen has to go back, and then queen captures on h5, just wins the game. So after rook to a1 check, bishop to f1, Praggnanandhaa goes for the absolute strongest move, and now knight to a4, preparing to shift the knight back to c5. Rook to d3, and now rook to e1, and this move is maybe a bit of a time waster. Maybe knight coming to c5 is the quicker way to go, but this game is so complicated, it's hard to really say what is what. Rook to e1 was played, and now rook to a3. Now Pragg goes for the doubling of the rooks on the a file. knight a to c5 and the rook c to a2. Now preparing to bring the rooks into the game with rook to a7, maybe even rook to a8. So f4, Durarbayli continues his attack, and now e captures on f4. We have g4, finally chasing away the queen. Now the h5 pawn becomes weak. Queen to h1. Here the h5 pawn is still being defended, and maybe Praggo can even shift the queen into the attack via the h4 square. If the knight moves, maybe queen g5, maybe you can gain access to some of these squares. So knight to e6, offering a trade of knights, and here Praggo goes for it. Rook to a8. We have knight captures on d4, and before capturing on d4, we have to decide that this is the best course of action for black, because the knight guards the rook on f8, but if you don't play this, you don't really have a move. So just to give you an example, if you try something like king g8, now you're defending the rook, knight captures on d4 becomes an idea. Praggo can just trade rook captures, king captures, go knight to c6, and here with the rook having access to a8 and queen having access to h4, it's game over. Black will just get checkmated regardless of what you play. Let's say knight c7, you stop the rook, queen to h4 now. And there is nothing you can do here. If d4, you start pushing your passed pawn, just rook e2. You offer a rook trade, and once black does this, black is really without moves. Point being, if you play something like d3, we can even capture this, and if queen captures, just queen e7 check, king to g8, now h6, and now you are getting checkmated. If queen d1, let's say you try something like queen a1 to stop checkmate, then comes knight to e5, and now there is no defense against both queen f7, and now as the knight is blocking g7, queen to g7. So that being the idea. So knight captures on d4 is the only move black has. Durarbayli plays it. Now comes rook captures on f8, and now king to g7. Attacks Praggo's rook, and now rook f back to a8. Here rook to b8 is the engine's favorite, but it's such a weird move to play going after a pawn in a crazy situation like this. So rook f to a8, Praggo goes for the more human move. And now comes knight to f3 with check. And this seems like a really good move, but it's actually a move that, again, gets Durarbayli into a losing position. Here, of course, you see that the rooks are coming to a7, so you have to play king to h6. But, I mean, a crazy position. Knight f3 check, king to g2, now comes king h6, but now it is much too late. But Praggo does not find the correct way. He plays rook to c2. The correct way is actually to play rook to a7. It seems like a simple move to miss, but the point is after you play queen to e6, because you have to keep an eye on the b6 pawn, and also you kind of have to keep an eye on the h7 pawn. But now, for example, rook h8 goes after the pawn here. You will defend it queen f5, hoping to give up the queen for two rooks, but of course white is not forced to capture. Rook b8 goes after the pawn, and once you defend it again, now you're going to play rook to b7, and now you are attacking this pawn, and black, of course, cannot defend both of them. If you try knight to f6, just bishop to d3, and that's it. Look at this. Rook captures on h1, rook captures on h7 with check, knight captures, and rook captures here with checkmate. So that's kind of the point. So easy to miss. So here rook to c2 was played. Praggo wants to go for rook to c6, and now comes queen to e7. Here you should really close the position with knight to c5, but I believe this is what Praggo had in mind, and he calculated it well. His idea was that he gives up the exchange here. He plays rook a6 check, king goes here, h6 check, king moves, and now b6, and now with queen having access to h5 and the passed pawn here, he has excellent winning chances. So instead, okay, rook c2, queen to e7 by Durarbayli. Now comes rook to c6 with check, knight to f6, and now rook to a3. Here, Praggo has ideas of even capturing an f3, but the main idea is going for rook to e3, especially if the rook on e1 moves. And now, what do you play? It's very hard to make a move here. The rook is hanging, but then you allow rook captures on f6. So here, Praggo is deciding to give back the exchange, and there isn't anything better that you can play. So Durarbayli captures here, Praggo captures on f6, king to g7, and now rook captures on b6. The only way to continue playing this. but now h6. Without the white being able to push h6, it's very, very hard to get this queen into the game. So here Pragg goes for a nice little move, rook to g6 check, and incredible as it is here, Durarbayli makes a critical error. Here he has to play king to f7, and of course it makes sense because you know what is coming. But he played king to h7. Point is that after king to f7, you can simply play rook captures on g4, and there is no good move white can make. Next move is knight to d2, and you're just lost. You're losing the bishop. There's no way to play this. However, after king to h7, there is a way to play this. Rook captures on g4 was played, and now the problem is that knight to d4 is no longer, knight to d2 is no longer an option because now the king is on a light square. Bishop d3 check, and we pick up the rook on e1. So you can't play that. So here d4, Durarbayli starts pushing his passed pawn. Now comes rook to g6, the only winning move for Pragg. And the point being now that if knight to d2, you can just play king to h3, and after rook captures on f1, you just checkmate the black king. That's the point. The knight to d2 no longer works. King to h8, and now queen to g7 will be checkmate. So instead, after rook to g6, queen to e7 was played by Durarbayli, but now the position is still winning for Pragg. He has a beautiful winning move. So feel free to pause the video and win the game for Pragg while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on always looking for incredible ways to sacrifice your queen. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is of course bishop to d3. We can do it in even slow motion because this is quite the move. And basically it looks fancy, but it's a queen trade, so congratulations to everyone who spotted it. There is no defense here for black. Point is, if you capture the queen, now we just play rook to e6 check, we pick up the black queen, and of course the position is completely winning. King g7, rook captures here with check, king f8, rook c7, and it's a very simple win for white. b6, b7, b8, as the bishop covers b1, so the rook cannot go behind the passed pawn. So instead we have queen to a3 here, now saying, okay, you open up a discovery, I'm just going to capture your bishop, but that also means that Pragg will win the rook on e1. So here, rook to e6 with check, queen captures on d3, eliminating the checker, and now rook captures on e1. Knight captures on e1, and now queen captures on e1, leaving Pragg up many pawns. So here queen captures on b5, but now queen e4 check, king to g8, and now comes queen to g6, and it was in this position on move 66 that Vasif Durarbayli resigned the game, and Praggnanandhaa is the hero of round 9 as he saves the day for India too. As like we said, Sadvani lost on board 4, and now the match is equalized by Pragg's great victory over Vasif Durarbayli. Here you resign because all of the pawns will now fall. For example, queen captures on h6. Now you will give some check to pick up this pawn at some point, or even if king e8, you can even go queen g6 check, and now if king d8, you can even play queen g5 check and force a queen trade. It's incredibly simple to win this, so of course that's why Durarbayli resigned. The white king is close enough to stop the pawn here, so you don't have to worry about that. So yeah, after queen to g6, Durarbayli resigned, and a very important victory for Praggnanandhaa. Now, what does this mean for the actual standings of the Olympiad? We're going to discuss this after the second video that I make, as the second important match was Armenia facing Uzbekistan, and well, let's just say Armenia did not have the greatest of times. So that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. It was a really wild one. Many chances for both sides, but in the end, Pragg prevails. I would like to thank Braxton Reynolds, David Kimura, Tharajan Rangasamy, Hububis, and Joshua Hadley for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Olympiad until it finishes. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.